I thought we were celebrating. That's the cruelest part. I actually thought that dinner was a celebration. I had spent the afternoon roasting a chicken, opening a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion, setting the table with the good plates, the ones we only used when something genuinely worth marking had happened. My husband Daniel had called me twice from the office that afternoon, voice warm and slightly rushed, telling me his mother was coming over and that we should make it nice. I remember pressing the phone against my ear and thinking, this is what normal feels like. I had no idea that by the time the plates were cleared and the wine was half gone, my mother-in-law, Patricia, would slide a manila folder across my dining room table and explain, with the patient, gentle tone of someone describing a weather forecast, that she had taken out a $500,000 loan in her name for my sister-in-law's house purchase, and that I was going to co-sign the documents before the end of the week. She said it the way you might say, pass the salt. She said it looking directly at me, not at Daniel, not at the folder, not at the table, at me, with that small practiced smile she wore whenever she had already decided how something was going to go and was simply waiting for the world to catch up with her decision. And Daniel, sitting 2 feet to my left with his hands wrapped around his wine glass, said nothing. He looked at the candle in the center of the table. He looked at the chicken. He did not look at me. That was the moment I should have understood everything. But I didn't. Not yet. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old. I'm a licensed physical therapist with a private practice I spent 6 years building from a single rented room in a strip mall to a clinic with 4 employees, a full patient roster, and a lease on a proper medical suite. I own my car outright. I have a savings account, a retirement fund, and a credit score that I worked for with the kind of steady, unglamorous discipline that no one ever applauds you for, but that turns out to matter enormously when a woman you've known for 8 years suddenly decides your financial identity is a resource she's entitled to use. I am not wealthy by any dramatic standard, but I am stable. I am clean. I am the kind of person banks smile at. And that, as I would come to understand over the following 7 days, was precisely the problem. Daniel and I had been married for 5 years. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party. He was standing in the kitchen eating hummus directly off a cracker with such unselfconscious focus that I'd laughed and he'd looked up startled and then laughed too. And that had been enough to start a conversation that didn't really end until about 4 years later, when things started to go quiet in ways I couldn't quite name. He was an architect, thoughtful, patient, good at listening, the kind of man who remembered small things, the name of your dentist, the brand of tea you preferred when you had a cold, the specific way you liked your eggs on Sunday mornings. He was not dramatic. He was not loud. He had, in the first years of our marriage, seemed to me like the most reliably decent person I had ever been close to, and I had loved him for it, with a completeness that I think, in hindsight, made me less careful than I should have been. When you trust someone that thoroughly, you stop checking, you stop looking, you assume that the steadiness you feel is being held up equally from both sides. His mother, Patricia, was a different kind of presence altogether. She was 61, recently retired from 25 years as an office manager for a regional insurance company, and she carried herself with the specific authority of a woman who has spent decades being the most organized person in every room she entered. She was always impeccably dressed, not expensively, but precisely, the way someone dresses when they understand that presentation is a form of control. Her hair was always set. Her nails were always painted a modest, neutral shade. She brought food when she visited, always homemade, always slightly more than was needed, always accompanied by some small observation about how she'd noticed we hadn't been eating properly, or that Daniel looked tired, or that the apartment could use a good airing out. She was not overtly unkind to me. She was something more insidious. She was consistently, reliably, bone-deep managing. I noticed it in the first year of our marriage, the way she would address suggestions to Daniel even when they concerned me directly. The way she would ask about my clinic with an interest so careful and probing that it took me 2 years to recognize it as inventory. She was cataloging my assets the way a person who plans ahead catalogs resources, noting the income, the credit standing, the professional stability, filing it all away behind that pleasant, neutral smile. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I was projecting. I told Daniel once, about a year into our marriage, that his mother sometimes made me feel like a financial statement rather than a person, and he tilted his head the way he did when he was genuinely listening and said, "Mom just comes from a generation where security is the whole point. She respects you. She just shows it in practical terms." And I had let that be enough, because it was easier to let it be enough than to keep examining something I couldn't quite prove. His sister Jennifer was 28 and had been looking at houses for the better part of 2 years. She worked in marketing, made a decent salary, had a long-term boyfriend named Tom who worked in logistics, and was pleasant enough in the vague, forgettable way of men who are always just slightly in the background of every scene they're in. Jennifer and I were cordial. Not close. There was a careful, mutual distance between us that both of us maintained without ever acknowledging it. The kind of polite detachment that functions perfectly well at family dinners and holiday gatherings and utterly falls apart the moment anything real is at stake. She was pretty, efficient, and entirely her mother's daughter in ways that I had always thought were superficial, but which I would come to understand were structural. The house Jennifer wanted was in a suburb, 40 minutes outside the city, a 3-bedroom colonial with a finished basement and a yard, and a price tag of $620,000. She had a down payment saved, $120,000. She needed a mortgage for the remaining $500,000. She had applied for the mortgage herself and been conditionally approved, pending a cosigner with sufficient credit standing, because her own income-to-debt ratio was not quite clean enough to satisfy the lender independently. This was the fact that Patricia had been sitting with for 3 months before that dinner. 3 months of planning. 3 months of looking at the situation from every angle and arriving at the same conclusion. The cosigner she needed was me. I didn't know any of this when I set the table that evening. I knew only that the chicken smelled good and the wine was a Bordeaux we'd been given as a gift, and that Daniel had seemed lighter than usual all afternoon, which I had interpreted as happiness, but which I now understand was the specific temporary relief of a man who has been carrying a secret and is about to have it taken off his hands by someone else. Patricia arrived at 7:15, punctual as always, carrying a Tupperware container of lemon bars and wearing a cream-colored blouse that she had clearly ironed. She kissed me on both cheeks. She admired the table. She asked about a patient I'd mentioned the last time we'd spoken, something about a recovering knee surgery. And I remember being briefly, genuinely warmed by the fact that she'd remembered, before understanding later that this, too, was part of the method. Keep people feeling seen. Keep people off guard. Always lead with warmth before you lead with the ask. Dinner was pleasant. We talked about Daniel's current project, a mixed-use development on the east side that he'd been working on for 8 months, and about a trip Jennifer and Tom were considering taking to Portugal, and about the summer heat and whether the neighborhood association was going to address the broken light on the corner of our street. Patricia ate with the neat, deliberate appetite of a woman who controls everything she does, and complimented the chicken twice in ways that felt genuine. The wine went around. The conversation moved at the easy, unhurried pace of people who know each other well enough to be comfortable. And I sat across from my mother-in-law and felt, God help me, grateful. Grateful for the family I had married into, for the fact that, however complicated she sometimes made me feel, Patricia was present and invested and reliably, practically there, which was more than I could say for my own parents, who had retired to Florida 6 years ago and called on birthdays and major holidays, and otherwise maintained the pleasant, loving distance of people who had done their part. It was after the plates were cleared and I had come back from the kitchen with coffee that Patricia opened her purse and took out the folder. She placed it in the center of the table with both hands, the way you'd place an important document, not casually, not incidentally, but with the deliberate care of a person who understands that objects have weight when placed correctly. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked at me. and she said, "Claire, I need to talk to you about something that's very important to this family." I set down my coffee cup. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at the folder. "I've taken out a loan," Patricia said, "to help Jennifer purchase her home. $500,000, secured against my own assets. The bank requires a co-signer with strong credit and stable income. You are the most qualified person in this family to serve in that role." She paused. "I'd like you to sign by Friday." The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street, and its headlights swept briefly across the wall. "I'm sorry," I said. "Can you say that again?" She said it again. Same words, same tone, same folded hands, same small, patient smile, as though repetition would make it land differently. I looked at Daniel again. He was now looking at the candle. "Daniel," I said, "Mom and I have talked about this," he said, very quietly, in the tone of a man reading from a prepared statement. "Jennifer needs this house. Mom has the loan secured. It just needs a co-signer. You're the logical choice." "The logical choice," I repeated. "Claire." Patricia's voice was gentle and utterly firm, the way a door is firm. It doesn't push back. It simply does not open. "We are family. Jennifer has wanted this for years. This is a very simple thing you can do to help someone you care about." "It's not a simple thing," I said. "Co-signing a $500,000 loan is not a simple thing. It means I am legally responsible for that debt if Jennifer defaults." "Jennifer won't default. That's not a guarantee I can take to a bank." "Claire," and there it was, the slight shift in register, the millimeter of steel beneath the silk. "I'm not asking you to do something unreasonable. I'm asking you to support your family." I looked at my husband. My husband looked at the table. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course," Patricia said, and closed the folder and smiled and picked up her coffee cup. "Take until Friday." That night, after Patricia left and the dishes were done and the wine glasses were rinsed and set on the rack, Daniel and I stood in the kitchen, in the silence that follows a conversation that hasn't been finished. I was wiping down the counter. He was standing by the window with his arms crossed and his shoulders in the particular set that I had learned, over 5 years, meant that he was braced for something. "You knew about this," I said. "Yes," he said. "How long?" "A few weeks." I stopped wiping. I set the cloth down on the counter, very carefully, and turned to face him. "A few weeks," I said. "You knew your mother was going to ask me to co-sign a $500,000 loan, and you didn't tell me. You let me set the table and cook dinner and open the good wine, and you sat there while she blindsided me, and you said nothing." I didn't want to start a fight before she had a chance to explain. "Explain what, Daniel? What explanation makes this acceptable?" He uncrossed his arms and pressed the heels of his hands against the countertop and looked out the window at the dark street below. "Jennifer really wants this house," he said. "Mom really wants to help her. And you have the strongest credit of anyone in the family. It made sense." "It made sense to you," I said, "without asking me, without warning me. I'm asking you now. Your mother asked me. You sat there." The silence that followed was one of those silences that don't feel like pauses. They feel like arrivals, like something that has been traveling toward you for a long time has finally gotten here. "I need you to think about this rationally," Daniel said. "I am thinking about it rationally," I said. "Rationally, co-signing a loan of this size exposes my credit, my practice, and my financial security to a risk I have no control over. Rationally, Jennifer and Tom's income history is not something I have any visibility into. Rationally, your mother presented this as a fait accompli with a deadline of 4 days, which is not how you present something you genuinely believe is a reasonable request. That is how you present something you expect resistance to." He was quiet. "I'm going to bed," I said. "I'll think about it." I did not sleep. The next morning, I called my friend Rachel before I called anyone else, because Rachel is an estate attorney and has been my closest friend since graduate school, and is constitutionally incapable of softening bad news in ways that make it worse. I told her everything, The dinner, the folder, the Friday deadline, Daniel's pre-knowledge, the specific silence in which my husband had sat while his mother laid out her terms. Rachel listened without interrupting, which is something she almost never does, which told me, before she said a word, that what I'd described was serious. "Don't sign," she said. I wasn't going to. "No, Claire, do not sign under any circumstances, no matter what pressure they apply. Co-signing at that amount with that timeline and that level of family pressure is a trap. Even if Jennifer never defaults, and I'm not saying she would, you would have a $500,000 liability attached to your name for the duration of the mortgage. That's 30 years. That affects every financial decision you make for 30 years. Your practice expansion, any property you try to purchase, any credit application. You become responsible for someone else's debt with zero control over how it's managed." "I know," I said. "Does Daniel understand what he asked you?" I thought about the window, the set of his shoulders, the practiced, careful way he'd said, "I need you to think about this rationally." "I think," I said slowly, "that Daniel has been thinking about this for weeks and has already decided what I'm going to do." I think the conversation last night was the announcement of a decision that's been made without me. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant thing to say about your husband." "I know." "Is there anything else going on? Any other financial conversations you've had recently that felt off?" I thought about it. There had been a conversation in February, 2 months prior, about refinancing our apartment. Daniel had mentioned it casually over breakfast, something about rates being good, and I'd said I'd look into it when I had a free afternoon, and it had drifted into the general background noise of daily life, the way non-urgent financial conversations often do. There had been, now that I pressed my memory, a question Patricia had asked the last time she'd visited. Something about whether we'd ever considered buying instead of renting, whether the practice income was sufficient for a mortgage. That I had answered openly and without suspicion, because I had been operating, as I apparently always had been with this woman, without enough suspicion. "There might be," I said. "I need to look at some things." "Look at everything," Rachel said. "And Claire, document this. Write down everything that was said last night, the date, the time, who said what. If this escalates, you want a record." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and looked at the morning light coming through the window. It was a Tuesday. I had patients at 9. The clinic was 12 minutes from the apartment. I had a life that functioned, that held together, that I had built with my own hands over years of careful, unglamorous work. And somewhere in the past 8 hours, I had become the person who needed to document a dinner with her mother-in-law. I wrote everything down. When Daniel left for the office, he kissed me on the cheek with a distracted tenderness that was either genuine or practiced, and said, "Think it over. Mom just wants what's best for Jennifer." I said, "I know." I said it the way you say things when you are already somewhere else, already turning over stones in your own mind, already beginning to understand that the ground beneath you is not quite what you thought it was. I did not tell him I'd called Rachel. I did not tell him I was documenting. Something in me, some quiet, self-protective instinct that I had spent years suppressing in the interest of marital harmony, had already begun to operate independently. At the clinic that morning, I moved through my patient sessions on a kind of autopilot, hands doing their work while my mind ran the previous evening's footage over and over, pausing on specific frames. Patricia's folded hands, the way she had looked at me and not at Daniel when she made the ask. "You are the most qualified person in this family." The slight emphasis, not "we'd like you to," but "you are the most qualified," as though she was telling me something about myself rather than making a request. The Friday deadline, the folder, already prepared, brought to dinner like a side dish. 3 months, Rachel had estimated, based on the timeline of Jennifer's approval process. 3 months of planning. And Daniel had known for weeks. Between my 11 o'clock and noon patients, I sat at my desk and pulled up my credit file. I hadn't looked at it since the previous spring. There had been no reason to. It was clean, as it always was. No missed payments, no outstanding disputes, one open credit card used responsibly, the business line of credit for the clinic that I serviced ahead of schedule every quarter. It was, by any reasonable measure, a portrait of financial integrity. And it was, I now understood, the reason I was sitting here on a Tuesday morning in March, trying to figure out how my marriage had turned into something I didn't recognize. I called the bank at 1 o'clock. Not my bank, the lender Patricia had mentioned. I explained that I understood a loan had been originated with a cosigner requirement, and I wanted to understand the terms before making any decision. The loan officer, after verifying that I was indeed being approached as a potential cosigner, walked me through the structure. $500,000 at a 30-year term. Patricia's assets, her retirement account, the value of her home, listed as collateral. The cosigner would assume full liability in the event of default. Full liability, the officer repeated, with the neutral professional emphasis of someone who has watched enough cosigners learn this lesson after the fact to want to make sure the ones still in the decision phase understand it clearly. If the primary borrower and the original loan taker both default, I said, the cosigner is responsible for the full $500,000. The cosigner is liable for the outstanding balance, he confirmed. Yes. I thanked him and hung up and sat with my hands flat on my desk and breathed. Full liability. $500,000. My clinic, my car, my savings account, my retirement fund. Everything I had built, everything I had protected, everything I had carefully and deliberately constructed as the infrastructure of a life I controlled. All of it exposed. All of it attachable. All of it at risk because my sister-in-law wanted a 3-bedroom colonial with a finished basement, and my mother-in-law had decided that the most convenient cosigner was me. I thought about Patricia's face when she placed the folder on the table. The absence of uncertainty in it, the complete serene confidence of a woman who is telling you something rather than asking you something. I thought about Daniel. I thought about weeks. I thought about the kiss on the cheek that morning and the word rationally and the way he had looked at the candle. I sent Daniel a text. Can we talk tonight? Just us, before any calls or visits. He replied 40 minutes later. Of course. Everything okay? I put the phone face down and went back to my patients. That evening we sat in the living room after dinner. Daniel on the couch, me in the chair across from him, the furniture arrangement of a conversation that is not going to be easy. And I told him what I'd learned. The full liability clause, the 30-year term, the exposure to my practice, my savings, my everything. I told him quietly and without dramatics because this was not a moment for dramatics. This was a moment for clarity. He listened. He kept his hands on his knees and he listened, and his face did the thing it did when he was processing something he'd already known but hadn't wanted to fully examine. A kind of deliberate stillness, a holding pattern. I understand your concern, he said when I finished. My concern, I said. Claire, Daniel, I need you to hear me. I am not going to co-sign this loan. Not because I don't love Jennifer, not because I don't want good things for your family, but because what your mother is asking me to do is put my entire financial life on the line for a debt I have no control over. That is not something I'm willing to do. And I need to know that you understand that and that you're with me on this. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear the traffic outside and the hum of the refrigerator and the soft, persistent sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Mom is going to be very upset, he said finally. Something cold moved through me. Not the answer I had needed, not even close. I'm sure she will be, I said. She's been planning this for months. She really wants Jennifer to have this house. I know that, Daniel. You're the only one with the credit standing to make this work. I know that, too. My voice was very steady. That's why she chose me. That's why this plan works, specifically because of me, which means that what she is actually asking is not for a favor. It's for access to a resource she has decided she's entitled to. And I'm telling you, as your wife, that she is not." He looked at the coffee table. He said, "Can we sleep on it?" I looked at my husband, at the careful, decent, thoughtful face of the man I had loved for 8 years. And I understood, with a precision that felt like a small, quiet devastation, that sleeping on it meant waiting to see if I would change my mind. It did not mean he was going to change his. "Yes," I said, "we can sleep on it." But I already knew what my answer was, and I had already begun, without fully acknowledging it yet, to understand that his answer and mine were not going to be the same. Wednesday, Thursday. The space between Patricia's request and Friday's deadline was a strange, pressurized silence. Daniel and I moved through the apartment with careful, practiced normalcy. Coffee in the morning, conversation about work, dinner at the table. But beneath the surface, everything was slightly different, the way water feels different when you know there's a current underneath it. He didn't push me. He didn't bring up his mother or the loan or the folder. He was, if anything, more attentive than usual. He picked up my dry cleaning without being asked. He bought the brand of olive oil I liked. He asked about my Wednesday patients with interest that might have been genuine or might have been the behavior of a man running a campaign he hadn't admitted to himself. I didn't know anymore. That was the terrible thing. I no longer knew which of his gestures were real and which were management. On Thursday evening, Patricia called. Daniel handed me the phone with an expression of studied neutrality that I had stopped being able to read. "Claire, darling," her voice was warm, "I just wanted to check in. I know this is a big decision, and I want you to know I understand that. I don't want you to feel pressured." A pause. "I just also want you to understand what this means to Jennifer. She's been working toward this for so long. Tom's been so patient. This house it's their future, Claire, and you have the ability to give that to them." "Patricia," I said, "I've thought about it very carefully. I can't co-sign." The warmth did not leave her voice, but something shifted beneath it, the way a room changes when someone closes a window you hadn't noticed was open. "I see," she said. "I'm sorry. I hope Jennifer finds another path forward." "Well," a pause, "I suppose we'll have to talk about what that means." "For Jennifer's mortgage?" "For all of it," she said pleasantly, and hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and that last phrase settling over me like weather. For all of it. I turned the words over. They were not specific. They were not a threat. They were, I understood with a cold, absolute clarity, a declaration. A statement of intent from a woman who had been planning for 3 months and was not accustomed to her plans failing. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in the dark and listened to Daniel breathe beside me and thought about Rachel's instruction: document everything. I thought about what Patricia might mean by all of it. I thought about the refinancing conversation in February, the question about the practice income, the years of careful cataloging behind that pleasant, neutral smile. At 2 a.m, I got up and went to the kitchen and sat at the table with my laptop, and I started going through our shared financial accounts. Savings, joint checking, the credit card we shared for household expenses. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I was looking for anything that felt wrong. I found it in the joint checking account. It had been there for 6 weeks, and I had not seen it because I did not monitor the joint account closely. We used it for utilities and groceries. It was low stakes. I had not looked at it with any scrutiny since the previous year. But there it was, 4 transfers, each for $1,500 in the past 6 weeks, from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. 4 transfers, $6,000, gone quietly into a number I had never seen before. My hands went very still on the keyboard. The kitchen was silent. The clock on the microwave read 2:17. I wrote down the account number. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, very still, with the refrigerator humming and the city quiet outside, and the feeling that I had just opened a door I could not close again, and that on the other side of it was something that was going to change everything. I did not confront Daniel on Friday morning. I did not ask about the account. I said good morning and drank my coffee and watched him move through his familiar routine: shower, shirt, tie, the particular way he checked his phone before putting it in his jacket pocket. And I kept my face as neutral and unhurried as I possibly could, which required an effort of will that I would not have believed I was capable of 48 hours earlier. This was not avoidance. This was strategy. Rachel had taught me, years ago in a conversation about a different kind of crisis entirely, that the worst thing you can do when you suspect something is to ask before you know. You ask before you know, and the other person has time to explain, to reframe, to adjust the story into something you can almost accept. You find out first, then you ask. I called Rachel from the clinic parking lot before I went inside. "I need you to help me find out who owns a bank account," I said, and gave her the number. "That's not how bank account lookups work for private individuals," she said. "Then tell me how it does work." A pause. "Are you filing a legal action?" "I might be." Another pause, longer. "I'll call you back." She called back at noon. The account, traced through a contact she had at a financial investigations firm she occasionally worked with on estate disputes, was registered in the name of Patricia Marlowe, my mother-in-law. The transfers from our joint account, $6,000 over 6 weeks, had been going to Patricia. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and held the phone and felt the world complete a slow, nauseating rotation around a fixed point. $6,000 from the account Daniel and I shared to his mother over 6 weeks, while she was planning to ask me to co-sign a $500,000 loan, while Daniel was sitting on the information for weeks, while she was calling me darling and asking about my patients and bringing lemon bars to my table and telling me this was about family. The transfers had started in late January. I thought about February, the refinancing conversation, the breakfast table. Rates are really good right now. Had that been an attempt to consolidate our finances in a way that would give them broader access? Had it been reconnaissance? Was I, and this thought arrived with a particular horrible clarity, was I looking at a plan that had been in motion for months, of which the loan co-signing had been only one piece? A plan that required my income, my credit, my financial stability, and had been slowly, carefully building the framework to access all of it. I went inside. I saw my patients. I kept my face steady and my hands sure and my voice warm and professional, because falling apart in the clinic parking lot on a Friday afternoon was not something I was going to allow myself to do. Not yet. Not until I understood the full shape of it. Not until I knew what I was actually dealing with. After my last patient, I drove to Rachel's office. She had cleared her afternoon. She met me at the door with coffee and the particular expression she wore when she was taking something seriously. Focused, clear-eyed, with the quiet fury of someone who is angry on your behalf and is channeling it entirely into precision. We sat at her conference table and I laid out everything I had: the dinner, the folder, the Friday deadline, the 6 transfers, Daniel's prior knowledge, Patricia's final phone call, the phrase for all of it. Rachel listened without interrupting. She wrote things down. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "Okay. Is there any scenario in which Daniel is not aware of the transfers?" I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the joint account and whose email received the bank statements. I thought about the fact that Daniel managed our shared finances, not exclusively, but primarily, the way it had evolved over 5 years without any particular decision being made, just a gradual drift toward the arrangement that made the most operational sense at the time and that I had been, I now understood, comfortably uncritical of. "No," I said, "I don't think there is." Rachel nodded. "Okay." She turned her notepad to a new page. "Then here's what we're going to do. Over the next hour and a half, Rachel walked me through a set of immediate actions with the calm, organized authority of someone who has navigated enough of these situations to know exactly where the edges are. Close the joint account, or at minimum, freeze outgoing transfers. She would help me draft the notification. Pull my personal credit report and flag it for any new inquiries or unauthorized applications. Engage a forensic accountant to audit the transfer history and document the pattern. Consult with a family law attorney, not because I had decided anything about my marriage, but because I needed to understand my position. And do all of this before I said anything to Daniel. Why before? I asked. Because the moment you reveal what you know, the situation becomes reactive instead of structured. You want to know as much as possible before you have that conversation. You want to have copies of everything. You want to walk into that conversation from a position of knowledge, not suspicion. I understood. I understood with the part of my brain that was still operating methodically, that was still capable of following logical sequences, even as the rest of me, the part that had cooked a chicken 2 days ago and opened the good wine and set the table with the good plates, was doing something else entirely. Grieving, maybe, or beginning to. I drove home. Daniel was not there yet. I went to his desk, the small, organized workspace in the corner of the second bedroom that he used for freelance drafts and personal correspondence, and I opened the top drawer. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Some part of me was following an instinct that had been activated and was not going to be quieted until it had seen everything there was to see. In the back of the drawer, under a folder of old utility bills, there was an envelope, not sealed. A standard letter-sized envelope with my name written on it in Patricia's handwriting. I stared at it for a moment, then I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, and at the top it said, Agreement of Financial Contribution. Below that, my name was printed, followed by language indicating that I, Claire Westfield, agreed to contribute a monthly sum of $2,000 to the Marlowe Family Household Fund for a period of 5 years in recognition of financial support previously provided by Patricia Marlowe to the marital unit. Financial support previously provided to the marital unit. $2,000 a month. 5 years. $120,000. My name was already on the signature line. It was blank, but it was there. The room was very still. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the clock on the bookshelf, the one Daniel had bought at an estate sale 3 years ago because he liked the sound of it, the soft, patient, indifferent tick. I stood there holding the paper and I thought, this was the backup plan. The loan co-signing was the primary approach. This manufactured document with my name already printed in the signature line was what they were going to try if I refused. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something I didn't have the full picture of yet. Perhaps this was what she had meant by for all of it. I took photos of the document with my phone. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope back where I'd found it. I closed the drawer. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists, the way I used to do in graduate school when the anxiety got very loud, and I looked at my face in the mirror and made myself breathe. Then I went to the kitchen and started dinner, because Daniel would be home in 40 minutes, and I needed to look, for 40 minutes longer, like a woman who did not know what she knew. He came home at 7. He hung his jacket. He kissed my cheek. He said, "How was your day?" with the easy, unworried tone of a man who had no idea that the architecture of the thing he'd built was already showing its foundations. "Fine," I said. "Busy." "Mom called me," he said, opening the refrigerator. "She said you declined." I did. A pause. His back was to me. "She's not happy." "I imagine not." He turned around with a glass of water and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not quite guilt, not quite apology, something more complicated than either. "She wants to come over this weekend to talk it through. I told her I'd check with you." "Tell her Sunday," I said. He blinked. "You're willing to have the conversation?" "I'm willing to have a conversation," I said. "Yes." He nodded, and the relief on his face was so unguarded and so complete that it hurt me in a way I hadn't expected, because it told me, more plainly than anything else had, that he had been hoping I would fold, that the plan had always depended on my willingness to fold eventually, that he knew his mother, knew her plans, and had been waiting, not to protect me, not to advocate for me, but to see whether his mother's method would work or whether they would need to move to the next phase. The next phase, the envelope, the agreement, my name in Patricia's handwriting. "Good," he said. "I think if you just hear her out, you'll understand." "I think," I said very quietly, "that by Sunday I'll understand everything." He went to change his clothes. I stirred the soup on the stove and looked at the steam rising off it and thought about Rachel and the forensic accountant and the copy of the document on my phone and the 2 days I had left before Sunday. 2 days to understand the full shape of it. 2 days to build what I needed before I walked into whatever Sunday was going to be. Saturday I spent in Rachel's conference room. The forensic accountant she referred me to, a brisk, precise woman named Diane, who had the specific gift of making financial malfeasance sound like a crossword puzzle she was mildly enjoying, spent 4 hours going through every account Daniel and I shared. What she found was worse than I had expected, and I had stopped expecting things to be better than they appeared approximately 48 hours earlier. The 6 transfers to Patricia were the largest, but not the only anomalies. There were 3 smaller transfers, ranging from $400 to $800, to an account registered to Jennifer. There were 2 charges on the shared credit card to a legal services firm I didn't recognize. And there was, most significantly, an application, initiated from our shared email address, which Daniel managed, for a home equity line of credit against the apartment we rented, which we did not own, which meant the application was either a mistake or a fraud, and neither possibility was comfortable. "The home equity application is interesting," Diane said, in the tone of someone finding an unexpected answer to 4 across. "Whoever submitted this either didn't understand that you don't own the property or was testing what could be accessed in your name before a more significant application was made." "Testing what could be accessed in my name," I repeated. "Your name is on the joint account. Your name is on the joint email. Your name and your credit profile are associated with this household." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "If someone wanted to make a financial application that required your identity without your knowledge, the infrastructure is there to attempt it." I thought about the agreement in the drawer. My name in Patricia's handwriting on the signature line. "Can any of this be filed with law enforcement?" I asked. "The transfers to the mother-in-law? Potentially. Fraud requires intent and demonstrable harm. What you have is a pattern of unauthorized transfers from a shared account to a family member, which your husband may claim was consensual." She paused. "The home equity application is more actionable. That's a credit application made in your name without your authorization. That's identity fraud." I drove home from Rachel's office on Saturday evening with my phone full of photographs and my head full of numbers and the particular iron calm of a woman who has moved from shock into purpose. The grief was still there. It would be there for a long time. But it had been placed somewhere, contained, set aside until I had time for it. Right now, I needed the clarity. Right now, I needed Sunday. Sunday arrived gray and uncommitted. I was up at 6, dressed carefully, not for a family conversation, but for myself. Dark trousers, a shirt I liked, my good shoes. Coffee at the window while the street below was still quiet. Daniel came out at 7:30, hair damp, wearing the uncertain expression he'd carried since Friday. Patricia would arrive at 10, he said. I said, I knew. We moved around each other with the minimal efficiency of 2 people maintaining the surface of something that had already, in ways neither of us had named yet, changed. Patricia arrived at 9:55, dove gray blazer, Tupperware of brownies, the full presentation, warm, gracious, unhurried. She kissed my cheeks and stepped inside, and I stood aside and let her in, thinking, the last time you were here, you left an envelope in my husband's desk. We sat in the living room, Patricia and Daniel on the couch, me in the chair across from them, the same chair from Thursday night when Daniel had asked if we could sleep on it. She opened well, she always did. She said she understood my hesitation. She used the word family 4 times in 3 minutes. She used we in ways that quietly folded herself and Daniel into a unit that preceded and superseded the we Daniel and I had spent 8 years building. I let her finish. Then I spoke, very quietly. Patricia, before we discuss the loan, I'd like to ask about a few other things. Something shifted in her eyes, very small, very controlled. Of course, she said. The 6 transfers from our joint account to an account in your name, the 3 transfers to Jennifer, the home equity application submitted in my name against an apartment we don't own, and the agreement in the second drawer of your son's desk with my name in your handwriting on the signature line, committing me to $2,000 a month for 5 years. The room went absolutely still. Outside, someone called to someone on the street. The sound floated up and was gone. Those are very serious accusations, Patricia said. They're questions. I have copies of everything. I'd like answers. Daniel said my name, the way he always said it when trying to create a pause for renegotiation. I looked at him, at his hands flat on his knees, at the complete, telling absence of surprise on his face. You knew about the transfers, I said. Silence. Daniel, you knew. Mom needed help after she retired, he said, very quietly. I was going to tell you. When? Before or after I signed the loan? Before or after the equity application went through? That document was just a template, Patricia began. It has my name in your handwriting, I said. The loan came first, the equity application second. The agreement was the third option if the others failed. That's not a template. That's a sequence. She held my gaze. The warmth drained away, and what was underneath was something I'd never seen there before. Calculation stripped bare, and beneath it, the particular frustration of a woman whose plan has met a variable she failed to account for. You've been very thorough, she said. Yes, I said, I have. I think we should speak with attorneys before this goes further. Mine is available Monday morning. A pause. You've retained an attorney? I've been speaking with one, yes. She turned to Daniel. A 2-second look containing the full weight of a mother and son and every accommodation he had ever made to stand inside her plans. Not warm. Reassigning blame, because I had not folded, and someone had to carry that. Did you know she had an attorney? No, he said, very tired. She looked back at me. Everything I've done for this family. I was trying to find a solution. A solution requiring my identity and my signature, I said. The equity application was submitted in my name without my authorization. That's identity fraud. Intent doesn't change the legal category. Daniel said, Claire. I'm sorry. I looked at him, at the genuine wreckage of a man caught not in malice, but in a long failure of nerve. He wasn't the architect, but he had been the foundation, the silence, the averted eyes, the compliant absence that made everything possible. I know you are, I said. Patricia, I said, I need the transfers reversed, the joint accounts closed, the equity application formally retracted. If we can resolve this without law enforcement, that is my preference. It is not my only option. She held my gaze for a moment longer. Then she stood, picked up her purse, looked at Daniel one final time, the look of a woman counting the next round, and walked to the door. She paused. She said nothing. She stepped out. The door closed. The apartment was very quiet. How much did you know? I asked. He pressed his hands over his face. The transfers, yes. The loan? I thought if she asked the right way, you'd understand. The agreement. She gave it to me 2 weeks ago. I told her it was a bad idea. He looked up. I should have thrown it away. Yes, I said. You should have. What are you going to do? See my attorney Monday, decide what I want. I need you to stop making decisions about my future without me. No more of your mother's plans that include my name without my knowledge. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Mean it. I mean it. The $6,000 was repaid within the week. 2 transfers, no admission of wrongdoing, just numbers reappearing with the brisk efficiency of someone closing a matter they want gone. The equity application was retracted. The agreement was voided in writing. A single paragraph that was almost aggressively ordinary given everything it settled. Daniel and I went to counseling for 4 months. We are still married. What we have now is smaller, more careful, less innocent, but it is honest in a way it wasn't before. We have looked at each other in the worst possible light and decided for now to keep looking. Patricia and I have no relationship, no drama, no recurring confrontation, just the clear-eyed distance of 2 women who know exactly what the other is. Daniel sees his mother. He does not bring me into it. This is the line. It does not flex. My clinic had a strong year. I check my credit quarterly now with the attentiveness of someone who has learned that vigilance is not paranoia. It is simply self-respect in practical form. My name is mine. My future is mine. I know that now in a way I didn't when I set the table that Tuesday evening and thought we were celebrating. I'm glad I know it now.